You're watching Northern Crimes.
June 28th, 1959, Stettler, Alberta. You're a police officer making what should be a routine welfare check. The Cook family hasn't been seen in days, and neighbors are starting to worry. Their house sits quiet on the edge of town, curtains drawn against the summer heat. You knock on the front door. No answer. The station wagon is missing from the driveway. But that's not unusual. Maybe they went visiting relatives. Maybe they took a trip. You walk around the property, checking windows, looking for signs of life. Everything appears normal. Too normal. Kind of stillness that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. You notice the garage door is slightly ajar, and there's something dark staining the concrete floor just inside. You push the door open wider. The smell hits you first, metallic and wrong. Then you see the bloodstains, lots of them. Your flashlight beam cuts through the shadows, revealing drag marks leading toward the back of the garage, toward the grease pit, where mechanics used to work on cars. You approach slowly, dreading what you might find. The wooden cover has been hastily replaced, but it's sitting crooked. Your hands shake as you lift it. 7 bodies, a father, a stepmother, and 5 children, all in their night clothes, all stacked like cordwood in the darkness below. In this episode, we explore the Alberta Murders, cases that shattered the prairie's peaceful facade and revealed that in Canada's vast wilderness, evil can hide in plain sight, and sometimes the most horrific events happen in the places that feel safest. This is Northern Crimes. On June 28, 1959, the small prairie town of Stettler, Alberta, was rocked by the discovery of a crime so terrifying it left an enduring scar on the province's collective memory. The entire Cook family, Father Raymond, stepmother Daisy, and 5 children, all aged 3 to 9, was found murdered and hidden in a grease pit beneath their garage. The adults had been shot, the children bludgeoned to death. All were killed in their night clothes, suggesting the attack came as they slept. The massacre stunned not only Stettler but the entire nation. Suspicion quickly fell on 21-year-old Robert Raymond Cook, the eldest son of Raymond and his first wife, who died a decade earlier. What followed was one of the most debated criminal cases in Canadian history, marked by troubling evidence, a dramatic escape, and a controversial execution that made Robert Cook the last man ever hanged in Alberta. Robert's descent began early. Born in 1937, he had his first run-in with the law at age 10 and was in and out of institutions throughout his youth. His mother died when he was 9. By 12, his father had remarried, this time to Daisy Mae Gasper, Robert's former elementary school teacher. The family moved from Hannah to Stettler, but Robert's problems only deepened. Between his first incarceration at 14 and his death at 23, Robert spent less than a year total outside prison. Released in early 1959, he returned to Stettler, claiming he wanted to reconnect with his family, but his behavior was erratic. Months earlier, while serving time for breaking and entering, he'd been struck in the head with a lead pipe, a blow that reportedly made him more volatile and quick-tempered. In late June, he was arrested in Edmonton after trying to trade in the family station wagon using his father's ID. Police found children's clothing, family documents, and household items in the vehicle. When questioned, Robert gave shifting explanations about his family's whereabouts, raising immediate suspicion. Alarmed, police visited the Cook residence in Stettler. There, they found bloodstains and signs of violence. A deeper search led to a horrifying discovery: the bodies of all 7 family members, stacked beneath the garage in the grease pit. Robert was taken into custody and charged, but curiously, only for the murder of his father. Prosecutors likely hoped a single conviction would secure the death penalty without the complication of trying all 7 counts. Before the trial, he was sent to Ponoka Mental Hospital for psychiatric evaluation. But just days after his arrival, on July 11, 1959, he escaped. His flight sparked one of the largest manhunts in Alberta's history. Police, military, and civilians scoured the countryside. He was eventually found hiding in a pigsty near Bashaw, 60 kilometers from Stettler, and returned to custody under heavy guard. The first trial began in Red Deer in December 1959. The Crown's case rested on circumstantial evidence, Robert's inconsistent statements, his use of his father's identity, and the items found in the station wagon. But there were no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, no murder weapon. Still, the jury found him guilty. He won a retrial on appeal. The second trial, held in Edmonton in 1960, produced the same result. Despite raising doubts about the timeline and lack of physical proof, the defense couldn't sway the jury. Appeals to higher courts, including the Supreme Court of Canada, were all denied. To this day, Robert's guilt remains debated. Supporters of the verdict point to his evasive behavior and possession of family belongings. Others argue the case relied too heavily on inference. There was no direct link, no confession, no forensic evidence, no smoking gun. Robert maintained his innocence to the end. In a poem written on death row, he wrote, "I sit here in my death cell, I know not why, for the evidence proved me innocent, and that is no lie." Some also questioned his mental state. The documented head trauma from the prior year may have impacted his behavior, an issue poorly understood at the time and largely ignored in court. In November 1960, Robert Raymond Cook was hanged at Fort Saskatchewan Provincial Jail. His was the last execution in Alberta. The Cook family murders remain among the most haunting in the annals of Canadian crime. More than 60 years later, the debate over Robert Cook's guilt still lingers, a shadow over a prairie town that never fully healed. On March 3rd, 2005, a routine property seizure in rural Alberta turned into the deadliest day for Canadian law enforcement in modern history. What began as a simple attempt to repossess a truck escalated into a calculated ambush that left 4 young RCMP officers dead and raised disturbing questions about policing in remote areas, officer safety, and the lingering danger posed by violent offenders. The tragedy unfolded on the farm of James Roscoe, a 46-year-old with a long and disturbing criminal history that included sexual offenses, weapons violations, and threats against police. His property, located 11 kilometers north of Rochfort Bridge near Mayerthorpe, Alberta, had become a fortress of paranoia. Though under a firearms ban, neighbors and police both knew he was heavily armed and dangerously unhinged. On March 2nd, 2 civil bailiffs arrived at the farm to repossess a truck Roscoe had purchased but never paid for. When they encountered his aggressive Rottweilers and hostile behavior, they wisely called for RCMP backup. By the time officers arrived, Roscoe had fled. What they found on the property would change everything. Inside a large Quonset hut, officers uncovered a sophisticated marijuana grow-op and numerous stolen vehicles, in various stages of being stripped for parts. The scene suggested organized criminal activity, and a search warrant was quickly requested. In the meantime, 2 constables, Anthony Gordon from Whitecourt and Leo Johnston from Mayerthorpe, were left to guard the scene overnight. What officers didn't know was that Roscoe hadn't fled in panic. This was a man who'd spent years preparing for war with police. He owned radio scanners tuned to RCMP frequencies, kept intelligence files on local officers, including their names and vehicle numbers, and had weapons stashed throughout the property. After abandoning his truck at his aunt's house nearly 40 kilometers away, Roscoe sought help from a local acquaintance, Sean Hennessy, and Hennessy's brother-in-law, Dennis Cheeseman. Despite expressing reluctance, the two eventually agreed to drive Roscoe back towards the farm. During the ride, Roscoe ranted about getting revenge on the Mounties, describing what Hennessy would later call devil talk. Between 1 and 3 a.m., the men dropped Roscoe off near the property. He wore socks over his boots to muffle his footsteps in the snow and carried a Winchester rifle provided by Hennessy. He crept back onto the farm in darkness, determined to ambush the officers guarding the scene. The next morning, 2 more constables arrived, Brock Myrrell and Pete Sheeman, along with 2 members of the RCMP's auto theft unit. At approximately 10 a.m., the 4 Mounties entered the Quanton hut to continue the investigation. Inside, hidden behind equipment and camouflaged by a sheet, Roscoe waited. As the officers worked, he opened fire with a Heckler & Koch semi-automatic rifle, killing all 4 almost instantly. Only Constable Johnston managed to return a single shot before falling. Outside, the 2 auto theft investigators heard the gunfire and spotted Roscoe emerge from the building, eerily calm and armed. He fired at Constable Vigor, wounding him. Vigor returned fire, striking Roscoe in the hand and thigh. Bleeding, Roscoe retreated into the Quanton and ended his life with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the chest. The loss was devastating. All 4 Mounties were young and just beginning their careers. Constable Anthony Gordon, 28, had been with the RCMP since 2002. Constable Leo Johnston, 32, had married just months earlier. Constable Brock Myrrell, 29, had graduated from the RCMP Academy less than 3 weeks before the shooting, and Constable Peter Sheeman, 25, had served in Mayerthorpe since 2000. The subsequent investigation uncovered how Hennessy and Cheeseman had helped Roscoe return to the farm and provided him with a weapon. Both were initially charged with first-degree murder as parties to the offense. In 2009, they pleaded guilty to manslaughter. Hennessy received 10 years in prison, Cheeseman 7. The Mayerthorpe Tragedy sent shockwaves through Canada. Critics called attention to the RCMP's outdated equipment and questioned why officers guarding such a volatile scene were left so vulnerable. The incident led to reforms in police procedures, including improved tactical training, upgraded body armor, and expanded access to more powerful firearms. Memorials in Mayerthorpe and Whitecourt now honor the fallen. Known collectively as the Fallen Four, their names have become a solemn symbol of the danger that police face, especially in remote parts of Canada, where backup is scarce and violence can come without warning. On April 12, 2011, Mark Twitchell was convicted of first-degree murder in an Edmonton courtroom, ending one of Canada's most disturbing and surreal criminal cases. Dubbed the Dexter Killer by international media, Twitchell was a 31-year-old aspiring filmmaker whose fascination with a fictional vigilante serial killer led him to commit a very real and brutal murder. Twitchell seemed like an unlikely suspect. Born on July 4th, 1979, he was a married father living in Edmonton with dreams of making it big in the film industry. In 2007, he directed a Star Wars fan film titled Secrets of the Rebellion, which featured a cameo by Jeremy Bulloch, the actor who played Boba Fett in the original trilogy. To friends and collaborators, he was creative, charismatic, and driven, just another indie director chasing a dream. But beneath that polished image was a far darker obsession. Twitchell idolized the character Dexter Morgan from the Showtime series Dexter, a forensic blood analyst who moonlights as a methodical vigilante killer. Twitchell created a Facebook profile under Dexter's name and frequently posted about how much he related to the character. In one chilling post, he wrote, "I have way too much in common with Dexter Morgan." In September 2008, Twitchell rented a garage in South Edmonton under the pretense of filming a horror short titled House of Cards. The plot? A man lures strangers through online dating sites and murders them in a hidden garage. Unbeknownst to his cast and crew, Twitchell was using the film set to build a real-life kill room. His first victim was Guy Tetreault, a 33-year-old who'd responded to a fake dating profile under the name Sheena on the Plenty of Fish website. On October 3rd, 2008, Tetreault arrived at the garage expecting a date. Instead, he was ambushed by a man in a hockey mask wielding what appeared to be a gun. After a violent struggle, Tetro managed to escape. Embarrassed and confused, he chose not to report the incident. Twitchell wouldn't make the same mistake again. 1 week later, on October 10, 2008, 38-year-old Johnny Altinger answered the same fake dating profile. Like Tetro, he was lured to the garage, only this time the attack was successful. Altinger was killed shortly after entering, never to be seen alive again. When Altinger didn't return home or show up for work, friends grew concerned. He'd emailed them directions to his date, and when police followed the trail, it led directly to Twitchell's rented garage. Twitchell initially claimed the blood found on site was part of his movie set, but police weren't convinced. The investigation broke open with a discovery on Twitchell's laptop, a deleted document titled SK Confessions, with SK believed to stand for serial killer. The file read like a diary of murder. It detailed how the author created a kill room, lured a victim under false pretenses, murdered him, and attempted to dispose of the body. It even referenced the failed attack on Tetro. Twitchell insisted the document was fiction, just a screenplay, he claimed, inspired by his film project. But the parallels between the document, the Dexter series, and the real murder were undeniable. The plastic-wrapped room, the meticulous planning. Investigators even discovered that Twitchell had broken into Altinger's apartment after the murder to send messages claiming he'd gone to Costa Rica with a new girlfriend. He then attempted to incinerate the body, but ultimately dismembered it and dumped the remains in a sewer near his parents' home. At trial, Twitchell took the stand and claimed the killing was in self-defense, that Altinger had become enraged after discovering the date was a prank and attacked him. The jury rejected the story outright. After just 5 hours of deliberation, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. The case captivated the public and ignited a media frenzy. Headlines fixated on Twitchell's love of Dexter, raising questions about whether violent media can influence behavior or simply attract those already predisposed to act out fantasy. Many found the case uniquely disturbing because it blurred the line between script and confession, entertainment and real-life horror. Over the next several years, he exchanged hundreds of letters with journalist Steve Lillibuen, continuing to distance himself from the Dexter persona, even as he included drawings of actor Michael C. Hall, who portrayed the character. Most chillingly, Twitchell was reportedly allowed to finish watching the Dexter series while in prison. In 2017, he was even permitted to join an inmate dating website, sparking outrage given how he'd used online dating platforms to hunt his victims. To this day, Mark Twitchell remains one of Canada's most notorious killers. His story is a chilling reminder of how obsession, when left unchecked, can spiral into violence, and how easily fantasy can become a blueprint for murder. On December 15, 2011, at approximately 3:30 a.m., gunshots shattered the quiet along Highway 2 near Claresholm, Alberta. Minutes later, 4 young people were dead in what became one of Canada's most shocking murder-suicides, a violent ambush fueled by jealousy, control, and the refusal to let go. It began the evening before at a pub in Lethbridge, where friends gathered to celebrate Tanner Craswell's 22nd birthday. Tanner, a rising star with the Lethbridge Bulls baseball team, was from Prince Edward Island and had recently been named Rookie of the Year in the Western Major Baseball League. With him that night were his girlfriend, Shayna Conway, also 21 and from PEI, and his best friend and teammate, Mitch McLean, 20. Rounding out the group was Tabitha Steppel, a local woman and friend of Shayna's. But what started as a celebration quickly took a dark turn. Tabitha's ex-boyfriend, 21-year-old Derek Jensen, unexpectedly showed up at the bar. A paramedic trainee in Edmonton, Jensen had struggled to accept the end of his relationship with Tabitha, which had ended weeks earlier around Halloween. That night, his bitterness spilled into violence. Witnesses saw him confront Tabitha and shove her out of her chair in a disturbing display of possessive rage. After a heated exchange, Jensen left the bar, but his presence lingered. Throughout the evening, Jensen continued to call and harass Tabitha. In one phone conversation, he issued a chilling threat.
This night's not going to end well for you. I hope you know that.
Meanwhile, Tanner and Mitch had early morning flights out of Calgary to spend Christmas with their families in PEI. Tabitha offered to drive them to the airport in her Ford Escape, with Shayna riding along. Around midnight, the four friends left Lethbridge and headed north on Highway 2, unaware that Jensen was following them. He wasn't just stalking them, he was hunting. Armed with a 9mm handgun, a Winchester rifle, and a loaded 12-gauge shotgun, all legally registered, Jensen was carrying enough firepower to wage war. He'd loaded his green Pontiac Sunfire with weapons and rage, and he was closing in. Around 3 a.m., the group stopped at a 7-Eleven in Claresholm for snacks. Surveillance footage later showed them laughing and relaxed, completely unaware they were being watched. Moments later, they were back on the highway, headed for Calgary. Jensen followed closely. Roughly 30 minutes later, near Claresholm, he rammed their SUV from behind, forcing them to stop on the shoulder of the highway. Shayna Conway, who was driving, stepped out to confront the driver, only to come face to face with Jensen and the barrel of a handgun. What followed was execution-style violence. Jensen shot Shayna 3 times, then opened fire on the vehicle, killing Tabitha and Tanner Craswell inside. Mitch McLean managed to flee the SUV, but Jensen shot him down as well. Mitch was found alive in a roadside ditch, but died shortly after being airlifted to Foothills Medical Center in Calgary. With the massacre complete, Jensen turned the gun on himself and ended his life with a single shot. Police arriving at the scene found 3 bodies at the roadside and 1 critically wounded survivor. Shayna Conway, despite being shot 3 times, had managed to crawl to a phone and call 911. She would become the sole survivor and only eyewitness to what happened that night. The investigation revealed how meticulously Jensen had planned the ambush. The fact that he was armed with 3 different weapons and followed the group for hours left little doubt. This wasn't a spontaneous act of rage, it was a calculated execution. The tragedy devastated communities around Alberta and Prince Edward Island. Tanner and Mitch were more than promising athletes. They were beloved sons, teammates, and friends with futures that seemed limitless. Instead of celebrating Christmas with their families, their loved ones received news no one is ever prepared for. Shayna Conway would go on to recover physically, but the emotional toll remains unimaginable. She lost her friends and her sense of safety in a single moment, and carries the burden of being the one left behind to remember it all. The Claresholm Highway murders remain a haunting example of how obsession, when left unchecked, can turn lethal. In the middle of Alberta's vast landscape, 4 young lives were stolen by a man who couldn't accept the word no. These 4 cases, spanning more than 50 years, reveal how violence in Alberta has often arrived without warning, in towns that seem safe among people who once seemed trustworthy. They expose the fragile boundaries between order and chaos, justice and doubt. Some crimes triggered national debates, others left only silence in their wakes. All of them left behind questions that still echo across the province. In a place where distance can delay help and isolation can mask intent, Alberta's vastness has at times worked in a killer's favor. Because here, in one of the most open landscapes in North America, the darkest stories don't always stay buried. Some are still out there, waiting to be uncovered.